Hi there, and welcome to the latest episode of Off the Data Provided, an interpersonal communication podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Dr. Marcus C. Shepard. On today's episode, we're just going to look at a new article from the Institute of Family Study entitled Couples Around the World Who Met in Real Life Are Happier Than Those Who Met Online. This will be a rather shorter episode today because it's midterm season for the good Dr. Shepard, so I'm going to be focused a lot on grading, but I did find this article fascinating and thought we should discuss it. Of course, after we discuss, we will have a brief Ask Dr. Shepard, which comes from a student who's looking for advice on how to connect and talk to their professor. So as I said, with our episode today, we're just going to focus on the Institute of Family Studies article around how couples around the world who met in real life are allegedly, I would say, happier than those who met online. So, of course, we know from countless articles, books, studies that how people have met has changed over the last 100 years. So we know, of course, in the 1930s, people usually met through their family, and around 1943, there started to be a shift where friends started to introduce people, and that became kind of the main avenue, or meeting at school, religious affiliations, until about 2012, for the first time where the larger share of people met online through dating apps, social media, of course, other forums on the internet. And so by 2022, according to a study on young adults by the Institute of Family Studies, more than a third of adults younger than 35 at the time, so I guess I was included, right, met their partners online. And another study from back in 2019, so maybe a little dated now, shows that among American heterosexual couples, 39% met online. So there's clearly been a rise in online dating, just not in America, of course. It's across the world. So given its clear popularity and ease of meeting a potential romantic partner, one would think that that would lead to potential better quality of relationships and eventual coupling, marriage. But it seems as if the data is either unclear or maybe it does work, maybe it doesn't. So we know that previous research, of course, in this field has been mixed at best. So some studies have argued that online relationships lead to more marital satisfaction, where others have found that it's led to less marital satisfaction. But what's important to note, and what the Institute of Family Study teases out, that most of these studies, though, have been done in rich, developed countries, such as the United States, the UK, Germany, and very few were done in less developed countries. So with this study that they are examining, this study looks at more than 50 countries, and some are developed, some are less developed. But across these different countries, it's actually making an argument based on how they did this study that people who meet offline find more satisfaction in the relationship and experience greater intimacy, passion, and commitment than if they had met someone online. So what they did account for, right, factors such as sex, age, length of relationship, socioeconomic status, can oftentimes influence relationship satisfaction and the experience of love. So they controlled for these factors, and they found that even with these controls in place, couples who met online reported less relational satisfaction and a lower intensity of experienced love than couples who actually met online. They also adjusted for the educational level. They also adjusted for residential area, so whether the person lived in an urban city area or more rural suburban, as well as sexual orientation, and still they did not find any statistically significant changes in their results, leading for them to believe as if meeting online isn't as satisfying as meeting your partner in person. So, what was interesting for me looking at kind of the data and the spread that we do find is that they found that on average, 16% of participants across all countries have met their partner online, ranging from a high of 33% in Poland to a low of 8% in Ghana. And with these 50 countries that were a part of this study by psychologists out of a university in Poland, they had 50 countries from North America, South America, Europe, Africa, South Asia, and East Asia, and they had over 4,446 partnered individuals who were a part of this survey. So a pretty wide survey across the board, which, as was noted before with a lot of these previous surveys, they had focused in more affluent, developed nations. And so this is giving us a better swath of people. So I thought that was interesting. They also found, of course, that people in urban and rural areas found partners online about the same rate. And I think when it comes to online dating, oftentimes when the communication around it is, it's easier to quote unquote online date if you live in a big urban area. But this found that finding a partner, which of course is different than dating, but finding a partner was at the same rate, and there was no evidence that younger people were more likely to find partners online than older people, and there also was no sex difference in chances of meeting a partner online. So for me, looking at this article and also looking at the study, I'm not a big quant guy, but I can maneuver my way through. And if ever I have questions, right, I am blessed and fortunate to have fellow PhDs who are quant heavy. Shout out to Dr. Anderson. Shout out to Mike as well. And we know, looking at this, right, something statistically significant or not, that this makes a bigger claim that maybe traditional dating is delivering a better relationship experience. And so the promise of technology, the promise of the increased popularity of online dating because it will allow you to sift through people quicker might not actually be the case. And so for me, someone who studies interpersonal communication, what I find very fascinating about the dating app experience, and as we've talked about on this podcast before, and I'm sure we will continue to do so, is that any type of interpersonal communication is what you make it. So it's all about how you approach the apps and how you engage with people on the apps. So I've shared before, my advice to certain friends who are venturing into the online space is you need to have kind of a checklist of things that you'll tolerate, things that you won't tolerate, and also a timeline. I think why we don't see a lot of success potentially from the online dating sphere is because people aren't necessarily as transparent as maybe they might be if they meet you offline. Additionally, sometimes when we are dating online, I think people have a list of attributes, a list of things that they are looking for in a partner. And therefore, physically, if you don't match that list, you're oftentimes ruled out. Where in person, maybe you meet somebody and you are just building. Right? You're just getting to know them, maybe just platonically, but then you see something in this individual or in this person that leads you to be maybe more romantically connected to them. Well, online, that wouldn't be an option at all because you have already ruled that person out. I'm thinking back to those love styles that we talked about, those primary and those secondary love styles. And so we know storage, right, is love that grows out of friendship, is usually characterized by stability. Well, if you are meeting people in a friend group, you're meeting them at a religious institution, you're meeting them at school, you're meeting them in a place that is kind of a breeding ground for friendship first, that will probably create and foster a stronger relationship than if you meet somebody online. Right? If you meet someone online, you have your list of attributes, your list of things that are required to be someone for you to potentially fall in love with. And that would be that secondary love style of pragma that we've discussed before, right? Pragma is when someone has a clear criteria of what their partner must meet before they fall in love. So this is when I think about people talk about educational background, socioeconomic status, maybe kids, no kids, what they look like, height, weight requirements, fitness, all these extemporaneous things that don't necessarily have a bearing on a connection are what is required oftentimes on these online dating sites, on Hinge, on Tinder, on I guess Match, Plenty of Fish, whatever, right? A lot of them have these attributes that you put in: your age, are you looking for kids? Are you not looking for kids? How tall are you? What's your educational background? What is your political background? And then they list other things that you can share about yourself. So people who are more pragma lovers, they're going to go through their criteria and they're not going to match with you, or maybe they will based off of that. But that has no bearing on an actual connection. Where a connection, you can meet somebody in person and fit that match, and something can grow or foster from that. I am recalling a time where a former friend of mine I introduced to a friend of mine, and my former friend was interested in my friend and was upset that I hadn't talked or introduced them. And I said, well, my friend doesn't fit your attributes, your criteria. When I said, well, what are you looking for in a partner? You listed A to Z, and he doesn't have half of these qualities. You said you have a PhD, so he has to have X type of degree. Well, when you met him still, he was finishing his bachelor's degree, so he didn't even have his BA or BS. And you have a PhD, and you wanted someone who at least had a master's degree. So already that was ruled out. You wanted somebody who was established with a career. Well, he was still in school at the time. He didn't have a career. You wanted someone who was X amount of height. He's shorter than that, right? So based off your own paradigm, you guys aren't a match, right? And so I remember we had this conversation at my house, and he was pushing back on this, and I was like, well, but these are the facts, right? This is what you said you were looking for. So I, put feelers out, and clearly this person is not a match based off of that. But now you're interested in them because of that connection, because of that intangible connection that we sometimes see that's fostered offline. So when we're given these criteria to search through people, you're going to rule out people that you might have great connections with. And so I can understand and see why meeting offline can potentially lead to more satisfying relationships, because oftentimes when you meet someone offline, and it's not in a strictly romantic sense, right? You meet somebody at a bar, you're hanging out with friends, you meet a friend of a friend, you join an organization, and you're just chopping up with people. You're just genuinely getting to know them, seeing if there are commonalities. We also might think about perhaps couples who meet online are also less similar in terms of maybe some of those things that are outlined. So if you are being honest with your list, as I shared before, I tell my friends who are online dating, have your list of things that you're going to tolerate, things you're not going to tolerate. So if religion is really important to you, I have one friend that's super important to him, then you shouldn't even entertain anybody who religion isn't, even though you find them very attractive, right? So on the flip side, sometimes you see those things, but you ignore them, right? The education, ethnicity, religious experience, shared values or interests, you might ignore those things because you find that person attractive. So you swipe right on them. And so already, maybe this would have been a person that, sure, you might have met them in person, you found them attractive, but after talking to them for a bit, you realize that you guys don't share that compatibility in these areas that would help foster a strong foundation. So you leave it where it is. We're online dating. Oh, okay, this person is cute. They're talking to me. Some things might not be, what I want them to be, but they're cute. Let's keep talking. Let's figure it out. Let's see what can happen. So I can see that being a potential issue online as well, right? That if you meet people who are offline, Usually you're meeting them in shared spaces or contexts where you might hold similar values, similar interests, maybe religious affiliations, a similar educational background, or a similar upbringing. So you're meeting them in offline spaces that already are fostered around some of these things, so you don't have to maneuver those. So this lack of similarity may actually promote less satisfaction with relationships and lower levels of experience love for those online daters, because you're kind of going more so if you don't have that list, as I shared before, where I tell my friends that if you're going to do it, have this list of rules, requirements, regulations, your shall not rules, have figured out what you're looking for so you can maneuver, right? You're going to have that kind of pragma ability where clearly you're looking for someone you're attracted to, of course, but then more so, you should be focused on these interests, on these shared values, on things that really matter to you. And I think some people, they're just not upfront about that. So I know, for instance, I don't want to have kids, right? That's a non-negotiable for me. So I make that very clear. And so if someone was interested in dating me and they want to have kids, well, we're just not compatible. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. Doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It just means some of the things we're looking for are not going to be lined up. And so we're not going to have a successful long-term relationship. And I would say we're just not going to have a relationship at all, because there's no point for me to engage with that. We also know sometimes that people feel as though meeting online is a more transactional approach to dating and relationships. And so sometimes you're not entirely compatible with what would create a satisfying and loving relationship, as I've highlighted. But just to underscore again, as I tell my students in public speaking, right, repetition can be a great way for us to remember information. So we know that despite its popularity, right, as the article outlines, as we're beaten over the head with on social media, that people are meeting more and more online through social media apps, through apps designed for dating, through dating apps within social media. I have a Facebook that I haven't been on in ages, but my students tell me about like Facebook dating. Even one of my friends was on it. And I remember going back to online dating and potential dissatisfaction. I remember he matched with someone on the online dating and showed me the person was a bit younger, and my friend wants to have a family now. And I said, well, do you really think this person in their early to mid-20s is trying to settle down and have a family in the next 2 years as you are? And my friend was like, no. I said, so why did we even match with this person, right? So some of this dissatisfaction with online dating, yes, the platforms maybe don't help foster a space to get you to get offline and also to make you meet these people. But you also have to take onus as the user. And how are you using these apps? How are you using these online digital spaces and tools to find what you're ultimately looking for? And so that goes back to what we have discussed before when I've previewed what I tell my friends is when you are dating, it is going to be important for you to have some shall not rules. Have some things that are non-negotiable. Shall not rules, right? Non-negotiables are things that you don't tolerate in any relationship. And so if someone shows signs of those, you should, of course, be ethical and effective and share those with them when it happens, or even better, as I always stress my students before, so that people are aware, so that they can decide if they are interested or willing to sign up for that or not. So, of course, it's going to be important to know those things. And with dating, there are some rules that are negotiable. So maybe with one person that you dated before, it worked. Maybe with another person, it doesn't work. That might be consistency, right? That buzzword. Well, what does that actually mean? As we know, words are arbitrary, they're abstract, they're ambiguous. Consistency, for some people, it might be we talk at the beginning of the day, we talk at the end of the day. For other people, it might be we talk throughout the day. For some people, it might be instead of kind of these social snacking conversations, we have one long conversation every 2 or 3 days as we're getting to know each other, and we'll check in on social media or whatever before. But it's going to be important for you to outline these things while you are fostering and building that relationship culture with your partner, whether you met them offline or online. I think, of course, with this. And the reason for dissatisfaction, as I've shared, is just the fact that a lot of people aren't aligned in those values that will help foster and create a strong foundation. And we usually weed those people out, in my opinion, offline quicker than we do online. Because also online, when you're matching with someone, you're also usually matching and talking to a whole host of people. So sometimes that disappointment or maybe a little tinge of disinterest is something you might not focus on as much, because then you have someone else to talk to, somebody else to talk to. And then eventually when you break that cycle and do form this relationship, as this thing looks at, then that is where you probably are sitting and really wrestling with those issues potentially in your relationship culture. Where offline, clearly people date multiple people, you sometimes, not usually, I was going to say, but sometimes, right? You're juggling multiple people, you're in that talking phase, you're going on dates. But when you do establish that romantic connection in that committed romantic partnership that you foster, you've usually spent more face-to-face time and time talking about those things. Where online, sure, maybe you texted about it or you sent some paragraphs about it or it was on your profile, but you didn't necessarily really talk it through. And that's going to lead to areas of miscommunication. So clearly, online dating is growing in popularity, but it's not delivering on better relationships than traditional dating is. So you as a user need to figure out how to use this new technology in a way that's going to lead ultimately to your best satisfaction, because it's only going to increase, right? Our reliance and usage on these apps and services is increasing, whether we love it or not. And so it's going to be important to figure out ways for you to do that, while also hopefully maybe being aware of the setting now, putting yourself out there offline and figuring out if you can foster a better potential romantic relationship there. So clearly, this article and this study makes this argument that, or this claim that couples around the world who meet in real life are happier than those who meet online. And the data does support it. But I also think, as any good academic or any good critical thinker would do, it's important to take some of these things with a grain of salt and to push back a little bit and figure out, well, how are the users responsible as well? What were the users doing online? For me, looking at the study, I would have liked to delve a little more into, well, how did they figure out that this person was the one from all the online people they were talking to? What was their behavior on these apps or on these platforms that help them siphon or figure out who their partner was? I think there's a lot of rich data there to be investigated and studied, and why I will always say I'll have a job teaching interpersonal communication, because these are things that people need to learn, need to freshen up on and figure out. So that is the article in a nutshell. And as I said, we'll have just a brief Ask Dr. Shepard. So I have received one from a former student, I believe, who is inquiring about how to talk to, I guess, a new professor. There seems to be a disconnect there. So the letter goes, "Good evening, Dr. Shepard. Hope you're doing well. I previously took interpersonal communication with you, and I'm glad to hear that you are doing this podcast. With that said, I've had a little issue with one of my current professors. We got off on the wrong foot, and I just don't seem to know how to get on their good side. The issue kind of stemmed from a disagreement we had in class around a topic. I pushed back on the professor, and it doesn't seem as if he appreciated that. Since then, I'm not called on as much, and I feel as if this was going to impact my grade. Any help you can offer me would be great. Best," and of course they leave their name. So first and foremost, I am sorry to hear that you are dealing with that. I don't think it's right for anybody to kind of retaliate on you, as you feel as if you're being retaliated against in the classroom due to maybe a difference of opinion. I know, for instance, in my classes, sometimes I disagree with what students have to say, and I'll make that known, but just because we have a disagreement on an insight or a view does not mean that I need to penalize them in any way. And oftentimes, at least for if you've seen in my course, because you are a former student, sometimes when I disagree with someone, right, I'll pull out the reasons why and tease out with the evidence to support my own claim and to also debunk their claims. I know famously I had a student who was playing some like men's rights videos in one of my public speaking classes. He did like an informative speech on one of the people and then did a persuasive speech on why we should, watch these videos and support these individuals. And as someone that did not agree with the content that was being shared, right, I made that known. And of course, his grade wasn't deducted because of the content. It was graded based on his delivery, right, in a public speaking course. So he still did well from my recollection, but we were able to maneuver that. This course, you did share, I didn't share some of the pieces about the course and the subject matter and what was disagreed upon because that might give away your identity. But what I did gather, right, is this is clearly a subject that deals with difference. And so it's unfortunate that your professor isn't maybe able to engage with the praxis of that in the actual classroom. So what I would do is I would send an email asking to meet with the person in office hours. So you start a paper trail and you clearly, most professors have listed office hours, so you can kind of go whenever. But I would just say, hey, I just want to make an appointment to make sure you're there and make sure what time works best. So then you have that. And then you meet with them and you share what you feel. Because maybe there's a chance that they don't notice that they're doing this. Maybe they feel as if you were someone that was participating more than the other students. So they're trying to give them a chance. That could be it. But I would say we give them an opportunity to rise to the occasion to inform you about why they're doing what they're doing or why there's been a shift. Because maybe it's just a miscommunication. But if it isn't and it is this, then you're going to find out. And then you can discuss with them ways to move forward if they're open and willing to do that. You're clearly being the bigger person here. But then after that meeting, I would send them an email. Of course, it's continuing with the paper trail, saying, thank you for meeting with me and discussing we talked about and give them a summary of the meeting and what I guess the next steps were that you agreed upon or maybe you didn't agree upon. But now you have a paper trail. And so if this gets out of hand or escalates further, then you have some evidence to bring to the tables, to the powers that be, if this does negatively impact your grade due to this disagreement. So I would say that is what you should do. Clearly, this is a touchy interpersonal relationship because there is this power dynamic of this professor-teacher having power over you in terms of your grade, right? They could fail you. They could grade you harsher than other people. So I would say create a paper trail and, tread strongly. Create that paper trail, share what you feel, be respectful of that person, allow them the opportunity, a moment to rise to the occasion and to hopefully make amends and a fix, right? Because professors are human too. We all make mistakes, but just give them that and see what happens. Of course, I am here to support you as my former student. So definitely feel free to keep me in the loop. If you need any assistance offline as well, we can definitely talk there. But thank you so much for listening. And of course, if you ever have an Ask Dr. Shepard, feel free to email me at AskDrShepard, or not Ask Dr. Shepard. Feel free to email me at offthedataprovided@gmail.com. Once again, that is offthedataprovided@gmail.com. So that is all I have for you lovely people today. If you're like me in academia, it is midterm season, so best of luck there, and I will talk to you all on the next one. Bye.